You know, when most of us picture a negotiation, we tend to imagine this incredibly straightforward, almost cinematic scene.
Oh, yeah. The classic standoff.
Right. It's like it's you, a house you want to buy, a seller sitting across this polished oak table, and, a bottom line price you both circled in red ink.
Exactly.
You haggle a bit, slide some numbers back and forth. You eventually meet in the middle and shake hands. It feels clean, linear, and just completely self-contained.
Yeah, the classic dance of the offer and the counteroffer. It's a very comforting way to view the world, really, because it makes the whole process feel entirely predictable.
Right.
We just absolutely love the illusion of a simple two-party equation where the only variable is money.
But then you actually look at the notes and excerpts we're analyzing today for this deep dive from Michael Watkins' book, Breakthrough Business Negotiation, and that entire illusion just completely shatters.
It really does.
Because, if we're being honest, even that simple house purchase is never really just two parties and a price tag, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look closely underneath that handshake, that standard house purchase is actually a highly complex, multi-party, multi-issue system.
Yeah.
You have shifting interests. You have strict deadlines from the bank. You're likely negotiating quietly with a spouse or a partner in the background about what compromises will actually satisfy both of you.
Oh, for sure. The car ride over to the viewing is a negotiation in itself.
Exactly. And then you're dealing with real estate agents. I mean, we think of them as our proxies, but they have entirely independent agendas.
Like what?
Well, like protecting their own reputation in the market or just getting the deal done quickly to secure their commission and, moving on to other business. Suddenly you realize you are not in a simple transaction at all.
Right.
You're navigating this web of linked negotiations, hidden motives, and competing priorities.
Which is exactly why this matters so much for you listening right now. Whether you're an entrepreneur trying to get a startup off the ground, a manager deep inside a massive corporation fighting for headcount, or just someone trying to navigate a tricky contract, you are constantly negotiating.
Nonstop.
It never stops. You're negotiating internally for budget while simultaneously dealing with external clients, suppliers, and partners. So today, our mission for this deep dive is to shortcut your path to becoming a master negotiator, giving you the underlying structural tools to handle literally any of these complex systems.
Which is so crucial because that standard how-to advice just doesn't cut it in the real world.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Because
Yeah.
if real-world negotiations are actually these intensely chaotic systems, how do we even begin to make sense of them without just, losing our minds?
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Because if I start looking at every single conversation as a web of hidden motives, I am going to end up never leaving my house.
That is a very real risk, and it's exactly why we need a foundational framework. Watkins lays out 7 organizing principles that fundamentally change how you view the negotiation table.
Okay, let's go through them.
So, the core idea principles 1 and 2 is that every negotiation has an underlying structure. And by structure, I mean the concrete components.
Like the people.
Yeah, the actual parties involved and the specific issues at stake. And this structure absolutely dictates your strategy. There is no one-size-fits-all approach here.
Wait, give me an example of how the structure actually changes the strategy. Don't you just figure out what you want and, ask for it?
Think about the difference between buying a car and executing a massive corporate merger.
Okay.
Buying a car has a relatively contained structure. It's just you and the dealership. So you can use aggressive tactics, you can threaten to walk away, and focus almost entirely on price. But a corporate merger, the structure there is massive. You're dealing with regulators who can block the deal, Wall Street analysts who can tank your stock, nervous shareholders, and internal executives who are terrified of losing their jobs.
Right, that is a whole different ballgame.
Exactly. Because the structure involves so many parties who have the power to just derail the process, your strategy has to shift entirely. You can't just bang your fist on the table like you would at a car dealership. You have to focus on building coalitions.
So the car buying strategy is useless there.
Completely useless.
Okay, I see. But here's where I get tripped up. Let's say I'm in that merger. Or, honestly, any negotiation where the structure is just terrible for me. The people at the table are hostile, or I just don't have enough leverage. Am I just stuck playing the bad hand I was dealt?
This brings us to principle 3, which is perhaps the most powerful concept in the text structure can be shaped. Yeah, you don't have to accept the board. exactly as it's presented to you. You aren't just a passive participant playing a game, right? You are an architect. You can actually alter who is sitting at the table.
You mean I can just, like, invite new people into the negotiation? But wait, doesn't bringing in more parties just create a bureaucratic nightmare? I feel like more people usually means more gridlock.
It can,
Mm-hmm.
if you do it poorly. But think about it strategically. Let's say you're negotiating with a stubborn vendor who just refuses to lower their prices.
Mm-hmm.
If you just keep arguing with their sales rep, yeah, you're stuck in gridlock.
Right.
But what if you bring a competitor vendor to the table? Or what if you bypass the sales rep entirely and initiate a conversation with their VP of partnerships, offering a longer-term contract in exchange for a volume discount?
Oh, wow.
You see, you just shaped the structure by adding a new party and a new issue, and suddenly you created leverage where you previously had absolutely none.
Ah, okay. It's like everyone else is playing a rigid game of checkers, but you're realizing you can actually build extra squares on the 3D chessboard whenever you need an escape route.
Exactly. That is a great way to put it.
Mhm.
And once you realize you can build those extra squares,
Mm.
you start to understand principle 4, the power of process control.
Process control, meaning what exactly?
It's not just about the substance of what you're arguing, it's about taking control of the information flow.
Hmm.
Who gets to see the data first? Who sets the agenda for the meeting? Who decides the order in which topics are actually discussed?
So if you frame the arguments before anyone else does,
Yes, process design often dictates the final outcome.
which makes sense because these things never go smoothly anyway. You have meetings that stall out, emails that go unanswered for weeks. How do you actually keep things moving when you have all these moving parts?
That is principle 5. You have to channel the flow. Negotiations naturally ebb and flow, but breakthrough negotiators know how to force momentum. They might use strategic deadlines to force a decision, or they use what the text calls barriers to backsliding.
Barriers to backsliding. Wait, what does that look like mechanically?
It essentially means getting the other side to agree early on to some basic foundational principles, or maybe signing a letter of intent.
Ah, getting it in writing.
Right. Once you have that initial yes on paper, it becomes psychologically and reputationally very costly for them to suddenly reverse course later on. You lock in the progress step by step so they physically can't slide backward.
That's smart.
And crucially, Principle 6 reminds us this isn't just about you as an individual. The sources highlight that the best negotiators organize to learn.
Right, institutional memory.
Exactly. Think about a huge manufacturing company. They might have dozens of purchasing managers negotiating with suppliers every single day. If those managers aren't systematically sharing insights, like, hey, the supplier always bluffs about shipping costs, or that vendor caves at the end of the quarter, the organization is just hemorrhaging precious opportunities to improve.
So knowledge about how to negotiate must be treated as a real corporate asset.
Absolutely. And then finally, Principle 7 is the leadership component.
Uh,
The text makes this fascinating point that often the hardest part of a negotiation isn't dealing with the opponent across the table.
oh, I know where this is going.
It's managing the internal differences on your own side.
Yes, we've all been there, right? You spend 3 months hammering out this brilliant, highly nuanced deal with a new client. Everyone is thrilled, and then you bring it back to your own internal legal department, and they just completely shred it over an indemnification clause.
Yes. You have to negotiate just as hard with your own team to align your priorities before you ever face the external party.
But let me pause you here because I really have to push back on this.
Sure.
We've talked about shaping structure, multi-party coalitions, institutional memory, internal legal battles. If we tell the listener to treat every single interaction as this massive, sprawling system with invisible strings, doesn't that just lead to total analysis paralysis?
It can sound overwhelming.
Yeah. How do we actually start without feeling completely paralyzed by the complexity?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, recognizing this complexity is actually your ultimate antidote to being confused or manipulated. It's not about overcomplicating your life. It's about seeing those invisible strings so you aren't treated like a puppet by someone who does understand the game.
Okay, fair point.
And to avoid that analysis paralysis you mentioned, Watkins breaks the entire process down into 4 very concrete sequential tasks: diagnosing, shaping, managing, and assessing. And the real secret here, the real paradigm shift, is that the most vital moves happen before anyone even sits down to talk.
Ah, the power of away from the table.
Precisely. Let's look at the 4 tasks. First, you have diagnosing the situation, which means systematically assessing all those components and barriers we just talked about.
Okay.
Second is shaping the structure. where you actively influence who the participants are and what issues are on the agenda. Third is managing the process, which is the actual face-to-face interaction, the back-and-forth momentum at the table.
Right.
And finally, assessing the results where you step back, evaluate the progress, and course correct.
Just to clarify this for everyone listening, because, we're so conditioned by movies to think the at the table part is the entire game. How much of a breakthrough negotiation actually happens away from the table versus sitting face to
The
face?
vast majority of the real work happens away from the table. I mean, diagnosing and shaping dictate the outcome before the first handshake ever occurs.
Really?
Absolutely. If you fail to diagnose the underlying structure and you fail to shape who is involved, you're playing a game defined entirely by your opponent. You're just reacting to their agenda, their timeline, and their rules.
Okay, I think we really need to see this applied to a real-world, high-stakes scenario to truly grasp how these four tasks play out.
I agree.
Let's look at the case study detailed in the source material. It centers on a guy named Daniel Riley. So Daniel is a 37-year-old director at a tech company called Alpha Microsystems down in Austin, Texas.
Right.
Now, Alpha has just dropped a bomb on him. They are closing their Austin center to consolidate staff somewhere else. But Daniel has built this incredibly loyal 40-person team of highly skilled programmers, and he knows they do not want to leave Austin. Their kids are in school there, they're rooted in the community.
Exactly. And Daniel has always harbored this dream to launch his own startup.
Yeah.
So seeing the writing on the wall at Alpha, he starts putting out feelers. Word gets out, and Headhunter connects Daniel with a guy named Ken Gorley.
Okay, and who is Ken?
Ken is a 45-year-old Stanford MBA starting a brand new venture up in Colorado called Omega Systems. They build managed care software. Now, Ken has venture capital funding, but he is in a massive race against time. He needs a proven, cohesive engineering team immediately if he's going to beat his competitors to market.
So Ken flies down to Austin. He meets with Daniel, and he also meets with Daniel's four top engineers. And Ken puts a very specific offer on the table.
Right. Let's hear it.
He pulls Daniel aside and offers him the role of VP of engineering with a highly competitive salary and 2% equity in the new company. Then Ken goes to the four key engineers and offers them team lead roles, each getting 0.5% equity.
Okay.
And he stipulates that those stock options vest at 25% a year over 4 years. Now, Ken heavily prefers they all move to Colorado, but he leaves the location issue open for now. So Daniel is sitting there with this offer in his lap. If we are applying that first core task, diagnosing the situation, Daniel cannot just look at Ken as a single variable, right?
No. Looking only at Ken is a trap. Daniel has to build what Watkins calls a party map. He needs to systematically identify everyone who is, or could be, involved in Ken's decision-making.
Yep.
Well, who else is Ken talking to? Is Ken aggressively interviewing other VP candidates? Are there other intact tech teams Ken could poach from a different company? And crucially, who holds the purse strings?
Oh, the venture capitalists.
Exactly. Ken has VCs backing him. What are they demanding regarding cash burn or equity distribution? Daniel has to map out all these invisible players because they dictate Ken's alternatives.
Okay, I see.
If Ken's VCs are demanding a product launch in 3 months, Ken's alternative to hiring Daniel's team is essentially failure. That gives Daniel massive leverage.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
Daniel is staring at a great VP role and 2% equity. Isn't his safest bet to just take the deal for himself, secure his own bag, and not rock the boat? Why should he go out of his way to negotiate as a unified coalition with his four engineers?
Because Ken is actively using a divide-and-conquer strategy. By offering Daniel and the four engineers separate, individualized deals, Ken is preventing them from realizing their true structural power.
Oh, interesting.
If Daniel goes to his engineers before they sign anything and says, let's negotiate as an intact team, an unbreakable block, their combined value to Ken absolutely skyrocket.
Right, because Penn doesn't just need a single VP.
Exactly. He needs a team that can execute on day one.
Mm.
A pre-assembled, loyal team that already knows how to work together is a rare premium in the tech world. If Daniel just negotiates for himself, he throws away that massive structural leverage. He has to shape the structure by formally linking his fate to his team.
That makes total sense.
Furthermore, diagnosing the parties also means Daniel has to figure out Ken's actual authority.
Wait, what do you mean by authority? Ken is the founder of Omega. Doesn't he call the shots?
He does. But does Ken actually have the final say on equity distribution? Or is he going to use his venture capitalists or his board of directors as a ratification tactic?
Ooh, like when you're buying a car and the salesman says, "I'd love to give you this price, but I have to go ask my manager in the back room."
Exactly. It happens in corporate deal-making all the time. You spend weeks negotiating a great term sheet, you're ready to sign, and then the person across the table sighs and says, I love this, but my board will never approve 2% equity. They're capping it at 1.5. My hands are tied.
Ugh, the
It's a
worst.
classic tactic to squeeze out last-minute concessions. Daniel needs to know right now who actually signs off on the final terms so he doesn't get blindsided by an invisible veto at the finish line.
That makes a ton of sense. So diagnosing the parties gives you the who, but the source text makes it clear that knowing who is playing the game is completely useless if you don't understand the constraints they're operating under.
That is the next step.
Right, which brings us to diagnosing the rules and diagnosing the issues. Let's start with the rules. What are the invisible boundaries Daniel and Ken are bouncing against?
In business negotiations, the rules usually refer to laws, industry regulations, and established codes of conduct. For Daniel, this entire maneuver hinges on intellectual property and employment law.
Because he's leaving Alpha.
Yes, Daniel's team built brilliant tools at Alpha Microsystems. Can he legally take any of that knowledge, or even just those workflow processes, over to Omega? Also, can Daniel legally solicit other Alpha employees to join him without triggering a massive tortious interference lawsuit from Alpha?
Wow, yeah. Omega isn't a direct competitor, but Alpha might sue just to stop the bleeding of talent.
Exactly. If Daniel doesn't understand these constraints, he could inadvertently cripple Ken's new company with litigation on day one. Daniel cannot rely on intuition here. He desperately needs to hire an employment lawyer before he makes a single promise to Ken.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Once you map out the parties and the legal rules, you have to look at the issues themselves. And the source text talks about unbundling the issues.
Yes, I love this concept.
I love this visual. It's like looking at a Swiss Army knife. When you're negotiating, you don't just say, I want the knife. You unbundle it. Maybe I really need the corkscrew and you really need the tweezers.
Right.
If we fight over the whole knife as one single object, one of us loses. But if we unbundle it, I take the corkscrew, you take the tweezers, and we both walk away feeling victorious because we traded things of unequal value to each other.
That is a brilliant way to explain log rolling. You're identifying differing priorities to create value. If Daniel just looks at Ken's offer and negotiates compensation as a single monolithic block, he is leaving massive value on the table.
Because compensation isn't just one thing.
Exactly. Compensation's a bundle, it's base salary, sure. But it's also the number of stock options. It's the vesting schedule. Like, what if Omega is acquired by a bigger tech firm in 2 years? Do Daniel's options automatically accelerate so he gets his payout, or does he lose them? And then there's anti-dilution protection.
Right, let's explain the mechanics of that, because that is a huge trap for startup employees.
Absolutely. Let's say Daniel takes his 2% piece of the pie. A year from now, Ken needs more cash and issues 1 million new shares to a new venture capitalist. The overall pie just got much bigger, which means Daniel's 2% slice suddenly shrinks down to maybe 0.5%.
Ouch.
Yeah. Anti-dilution protection is a clause that essentially guarantees Daniel's slice of the pie stays the exact same proportional size no matter how much new money comes in. And, the same unbundling applies to job title.
How so?
Well, VP of Engineering sounds nice, but unbundled, it means asking. Do I get the label of co-founder? Do I get a designated seat on the board of directors? Do I have contractual protection against my role being diminished if Ken hires a chief technology officer later? If Daniel doesn't unbundle these issues, Ken will just define them for him.
And this all plays into what Watkins calls the negotiation matrix. This is a grid that helps you understand exactly what kind of game you're playing. It crosses 2 dimensions. Are you dealing with a one-time transaction or a long-term relationship? And are you deal-making or managing a dispute? So you get 4 quadrants: deal-making, relationship-building, dispute resolution, and conflict management. Where do Daniel and Ken fall?
They are squarely in a relationship-building negotiation. They anticipate a long-term, highly collaborative working relationship, but the basis of it hasn't been established yet.
Why does knowing that matter so much?
This is crucial because it dictates their behavior at the table. If you were in a one-off transaction like buying that car, you can be incredibly aggressive trying to claim every last dollar because you will never see that salesman again.
Sure.
But here, if Daniel is overly aggressive and threatens Ken, that value-claiming behavior could permanently sour the trust they absolutely need to build a company together.
But even in relationship building, there are what the text calls toxic
Oh,
issues.
wait.
These are the landmines that can just blow up the whole room. In this case study, it's the location. Daniel's team insists on staying in Austin. Ken heavily prefers his headquarters to be in Colorado. That is a deeply toxic issue. How do they actually manage that when they're sitting at the table? Which brings us to the third core task, managing the process.
What's fascinating here is how skilled negotiators handle those toxic traps during the face-to-face interactions. You generally have two choices.
Okay, what's the first one?
You can strategically delay the toxic issue. You set the agenda, so you spend the first two meetings building momentum and trust by agreeing on the easier, unbundled issues: compensation, job titles, reporting structures.
Ah.
By the time you finally hit the location issue, both sides have invested so much time and emotional energy into the deal that they are highly motivated to find a creative compromise rather than walk away.
Right, they're anchored to the success of the deal at that point. What is the other option?
The other option is, if you genuinely believe the location is a true deal breaker, like if Ken simply will not fund an Austin office under any circumstances,
Yeah.
you tackle it head on immediately. You manage the process by bringing it up in minute one, so you don't waste 3 weeks negotiating equity for a deal that is fundamentally destined to fail.
That makes sense.
But the underlying lesson that Watkins really hammers home is that every single deal-making effort is essentially a dispute waiting to happen if contingencies are not thoroughly addressed up front.
And that ties perfectly into the final core task, assessing the results. We tend to think you sit at the table until someone signs, but assessing means actively taking breaks.
Yes?
Daniel should be stepping out of the room, huddling with his engineers and asking, is Ken digging in on Colorado? Are our assumptions about his VC pressure correct? Do we need to change our strategy? You're constantly looping back through diagnosing and shaping based on what happens at the table.
Precisely. It is a dynamic, iterative cycle, not a straight line.
It's incredible how deep this goes when you stop looking at the surface. So what does this all mean for you?
Yeah.
To be truly well-informed and effective in business negotiations means you have to actively refuse to accept the board exactly as it's presented to you. The simple two-party transaction is a myth.
A total myth.
You have to diagnose the situation by mapping out all the invisible parties and their hidden constraints. You have to hire the experts to learn the legal and structural rules of the game. You must unbundle monolithic issues, like our Swiss Army knife, into a dozen smaller levers you can pull to create mutual value.
And most importantly,
Yeah.
you have to focus heavily on shaping the process away from the table before you ever pull up a chair. You are the architect of your own leverage.
Exactly.
And as you step back into your own work this week, I want to leave you with a question to mull over. Think about a seemingly simple request or negotiation you're facing right now, whether it's asking for a budget increase from your boss, securing a new client, or even negotiating responsibilities at home. What if you viewed it not as a simple two-person ask, but as a complex system? Ask yourself, who are the invisible third parties influencing their likelihood of saying no, and what toxic issues could you creatively unbundle right now to turn that resistance into a yes?